Tony D and Little Joan somewhere in the house, and I have no trailers to speak of to analyze. For those of you who are new to my channel, that's what I do. I use my screenwriting powers to analyze a trailer to try to tell what it's about and if it's any good. The movie, that is. Since I can't do that, I'm going to talk, as I often do, about writing and writers. Most of the problems, I think, in media all go back to one inevitable fact, is that writers aren't treated very well. And there's no respect for the craft of writing, in my view. In comics, in certainly in movies, for the screenwriter, there really aren't a lot of good screenwriters anymore. If there ever were, there was a handful, and that was about it. Books, television, same deal. Writing is like an afterthought in a lot of mediums, especially television, movies, and comics. In books, writing kind of has to be in the forefront a little bit more, but even there, it's kind of secondary to the not the concept, but the how the book's going to sell. So a lot of people, they say they want to be writers, but they don't really understand what's involved. And I like writing a lot. I love it, but I've had students who wanted to learn writing, and when I told them what it was, and when I made them try to do the things that you need to do to become a writer, almost all my students quit writing. And I look at that as a victory. I know you might say, well, you discouraged those people. I really didn't. I told them what needs to be done. And what needs to be done if you're a writer, first, you have to read a lot. And second, you have to write a lot. Now, I spent a lot of my youth reading. I don't read too much anymore, which is kind of bad. But I read a lot of nonfiction about South Jersey and history and folk tales and stuff like that these days, because that's my wheelhouse right now. But, the problem with most writers, especially in comics, is they just don't have very good ideas. They also don't have any power. So very, very rarely when you do get a good writer, that writer really struggles because he's got the good ideas, and finally you got someone with the chops to bring your comic or movie or TV show to the next level, but he has no power institutionally in the system. So to give you an example, movies, right? The screenwriter really doesn't have a lot to say unless the producer happens to also be the screenwriter, the director happens to also be the screenwriter, or one of those two individuals champions the screenwriter as, okay, you got to be like the third, corner in the triumphant of power, which is the way movies should run. It should be the producer hires the people, and then the first two people he hires are a screenwriter and a director. And then he should be there to let them work with each other, and the screenwriter should have some veto power on the set in terms of the dialogue and whatnot. Now, you can argue that due to union rules, he does have some, not really, and most of them don't care anyway, because as long as they're paid, because they don't get paid as much, who cares, right? If you're getting paid, I don't know, $200,000 to write a movie, and you're expecting to get money on the back end, and they bring you on the set to rewrite some dialogue, and every time you do, you get paid even more, it's, well, you're kind of just happy to be there. You don't want to endanger yourself by pushing back all that much, depending. I mean, back in the 70s and 80s, screenwriters had a little more institutional power. At least there was a respect for them. So they could push back a little bit, but not too much. I've pushed back on a couple of producers and directors and gotten nowhere. You know, it really didn't help me out too much. Lost a couple of gigs doing it. You know, I had a client who he ignored botany, geology, geopolitical reality, geolo- geography, which was the worst one. He ignored geography. And I tried to explain to him that, you know, his idea for a screenplay, he was just ignoring these big things, you know, physics, uh, characterization. He would just ignore them and say, no, 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 I want this line, therefore it's great. And, you know, there are guys in Hollywood that'll write whatever you want. If you think it's great, um, that may not be good for the movie or the screenplay, but sure, they'll write it. But if you hired a professional to write your screenplay, who are you going to listen to? Yourself or them? I mean, why hire anybody at all? Might as well just hire a typist and dictate to them. So, you know, and there are a lot of terrible screenwriters and writers in general. Don't get me wrong. I mean, the guys in comics are terrible. You know, 90% of them are terrible. They're just not good writers. It's not like they're bad people. You're not a bad person that you can't really craft a good story. You're just not good at it. You just don't have enough experience. You know, guys who write comics, you know, there is a craft to it. But there's a craft to all kinds of form of writing. And, you know, in comics, it's not just about the format like it is in movies. With movies, a lot of it relies on formatting and dialogue. With comics, it's a little bit different than that. It's, you know, you have to sort of dictate a lot of the visuals, and you can't let the artist go too far out of bounds, or you're gonna tank the whole story. You know, I've been in situations on the comics where I've had artists who they take liberties with the art, and it kind of ruins a scene. Now, they don't mean to do it. They're trying to do something impressive, and it kind of depends on the project you're working on. But if you're working on, for instance, comedy, you know, comedy, it's got to go off for the joke perfectly. If it doesn't, you know, and some guys get you and some guys don't. I always tell this story. I had an artist, and he was a really nice guy, and I don't mean to throw any shade at him or anything, but he was a nice guy, and he was earnest, and he was trying. But I wrote this gag, and the gag was, the name of the story was the Isthmus Attacks. The Isthmus is a land bridge, right? So the idea was a fantasy comic. It was a traveler story, and the idea was there was a clue on their map that said, beware, the isthmus will attack. And they didn't know what an isthmus was, so they thought it was a monster, and they dressed up one of the characters as a monster to scare off their rivals so they could get the treasure for themselves. So they scare off their rivals because, oh no, it's an isthmus, run. And then after the rivals are scared off, they go towards the treasure. But to get there, there's a land bridge, and the moment they start to head there, the bridge rises up, and the bridge itself is the monster, and that's the joke, right? Because there are all kinds of crazy monsters in Dungeons and Dragons. But he didn't get that. He didn't get that. He drew it like 3 or 4 times, and he drew a monster. And I kept saying, no, no, no. The monster is the bridge. That's the joke. And he's like, oh, okay. And he'd redraw it. And, and, you know, it wasn't like, you know, I work with some artists, English is their second language. It was not that. It was not that. He just didn't get it. He just didn't. He didn't understand it or didn't like it and kept changing it and thought it would be better if he did it his way. I don't know. But he was a nice guy. Again, I don't throw any shade to him or anything. I think finally on the 3rd try he did eventually kind of get it, and we kind of got it. Wasn't exactly what I wanted though, but I think we had just enough. So yeah, I mean, you need writers, and writers really, yeah, they're the main talent. Okay, before the actors speak, before the director directs, before anybody puts up a light. The writers, you know, they are there to tell you what the deal is. And I've worked enough that I've been in situations where I came in on a project after another writer and saw the reaction between the writer's terrible script, and I replaced them, and that's why they replaced them. They had a terrible script. Then when the crew saw my script, and when the crew saw my script after seeing a bad script, they went, "Oh, it was clear," because that's part of writing a screenplay. You want to give very clear instructions on what the movie is about and how it builds and all that kind of stuff. And so when they got my script in this one particular case, which I really can't go into, they got the screenplay and a bunch of them read it because, first off, it was readable and they could follow a story, and they came back and you could see a change on the set at that point. At that point, everybody knew what to do. Everybody understood what each scene would be building towards. And that's what you get when with a good writer. You get clarity. It's very hard for editors and producers, unfortunately, to pick good writers. They don't often know what a good writer is. They end up picking guys who are good at pitching, good at schmoozing, but terrible writers. That's the number one thing I would suggest, especially for comics and movies and even TV. Clarity should be a main focal point. You should be able to read that script and go, okay, I understand this. I think what a lot of people do is they read a screenplay, and this has happened to me for clients. They read a screenplay or a script or whatever, and they laugh, and they say, wow, this is great. Then they read it again, and they go, oh, I didn't laugh as hard. Huh, that's weird. And then they read it a third time and go, oh, I'm not laughing anymore. Why isn't this funny anymore? Well, it's not funny anymore because you already know the jokes. And I had a client who did that. Like, he said, oh my God, I just read the script. I was laughing so hard. And I'm like, oh, great, good. You like it. He's like, yeah. I'm just going to read it again. And then he read it again. And he said, well, I didn't laugh as much this time. I said, well, you read the jokes. He's like, yeah, but I think they should still be funny. And then he hung up and he read it a third time. And he came back. And he says, it's not as funny as I thought it would be. And I was like, you've read this now 3 or 4 times. It's not going to be funny to you every time you read the same damn thing. We ended up working things out in that particular case, but that's one of the, if you don't have that communication with your producer, you may have a problem. The worst case scenario is when your producer is a low budget guy and he keeps handing off the script to other people and say, well, what do you think? Because he's looking to validate his own opinions instead of just being, straightforward with his own, but whatever. So, the reason I'm talking about this is Ethan Van Sciver was talking about, with comics, the main thing is concept, story, and art, which I think is mostly true. But I thought it was great that he put story ahead of the art, because it's really true. If you don't have a good story, all the great art in the world, well, it might sell it. It might sell it initially, but you're not going to sell issue 2. And your IP is essentially going to be DOA. So that's the main problem with comics. A lot of times they'll get great artists, but the writing will be such a secondary thing, and as evidenced by some of the stuff I was looking towards tonight. I don't have the links. I was looking at some comics earlier in Hollywoke Hot Take. This is the webcomic factory. They look at that and they don't understand a good story. Like, comics should be, like, Jack Kirby was one of the best, because Kirby understood, especially when you look at the Fantastic Four, that one thing leads into the next. And the pacing and the urgency in Kirby's scripts, man, it still holds up. I'm often amazed when I read his old work, and I just go, wow, I'm just so engrossed in Kirby's stuff. The stakes are high, it's exciting, everything leads into the next thing, and you're rolling along, and you get to the last page and go, oh wait, that's it? What happens next? He's really good at doing that. And that's the way comics, at least superhero comics, should be. That's what made them great. There's almost none of that now. The opposite, a lot of times they're DOA. I like this page on the anti-war comic, by the way. It's Captain Deflection, my Captain America parody. But yeah, there's just no urgency in a lot of this stuff. Now, for a lot of the indie guys, they try to do that. They desperately try to. But I would contend that a lot of indie guys can't write either, unfortunately. They write better than, the big two, the current crop of superhero stuff, but that's a low bar. You have to understand how low that bar is. Most of these guys couldn't write even when comics were doing okay. Back in the day, in the 90s, early 90s, when comics were selling like gangbusters, I didn't think most of these stories were good. They were okay. Most of them were okay. The bar was not the toilet, but it was mostly just very generic superhero stuff. The only thing that sold books really was, once in a while you'd have a Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman can write. I don't like his politics. I think his personal life's kind of a mess, but there's no denying he's a pretty good writer. He's written novels. I mean, that's one of the reasons. Chris Claremont, of course, very good. Mark Waid, I know, was good. I don't know about now. I think he's kind of ruined himself, but Kingdom Come was pretty good. But Waid is a very specific case, I think. Mark Waid, I think, is good at writing superheroes. If he's on it now, he'd have to be on a short leash. If I ran DC or Marvel and Mark Waid came in and I said, listen, I want some of the old Mark Waid. I don't want this new crap you keep doing. I don't want any of this woke crap. I want Mark Waid doing, fun, adventure, thrilling stories like he kind of used to. I mean, Kingdom Come, at least, it just took the old characters and took them to their logical conclusion. Now, a lot of people argue that's partly on Alex Ross, but I would say it was an okay story. It was a decent story. I liked it. Same thing with a guy like Alan Moore. I mean, Alan Moore, I know, he's a comic. But he's had some good runs. I mean, From Hell was really good. It was really interesting, I thought. Did some interesting things with it. Talked about the Ripper and the various theories. And I thought that was cool to have an illustrated kind of book like that, talking about the Ripper and the many theories. And I thought his theory was interesting. And look, communism wasn't, I don't think there was any communism in there. There was a little progressiveness towards the end. But for the most part, I thought From Hell held up. But he's basically out of comics. And a lot of these guys, I think, a lot of comedians have ruined themselves on the altar of woke. Television's in the toilet, at least the big name television stuff, for the most part. The only television worth a damn is kind of the streaming stuff, and that's sort of hit or miss depending on who you're picking on. Reacher's been great. There's been a handful of other streaming shows that have been decent, but for the most part, they have the same problems, I think, that the movies do. They just don't have anybody worth a damn who can write, or they might have some people who could write, but the producers are constantly rolling it back. Whatever good comedy bits. I mean, Lady Ballers is a huge exception to that rule, but the Daily Wire isn't producing enough content yet for that to make a huge difference on the stage yet. I hope they do more, because I would love to see a comedy show written by the guys who wrote Lady Ballers. Something completely, away from any of the network stuff. Even, Bill Burr did F is for Family, which I thought was very funny, and pretty politically incorrect for the most part. I don't understand the recent controversy, but you know, still, I think he has the chops for it. I think his writing crew had the chops for it, but it was out of Netflix, the same company that, I mean, even though they made F is for Family, they also made Queer Force, which I didn't think was a good idea at all, but because it starts kind of from a weird place. I mean, it could have been funny. It could have been a funny show, but it was not. I watched that first episode. But anyhow, forget the woke. It's about the quality of the writing. The quality of the writing has been a problem since before the woke. Hate to tell you. There were a lot of people in the industry just can't write. And because it is a secondary priority, if not third, the people they'll pick to be writers, they just don't care, in my view. Very few people care. Like, Larry David on Seinfeld, oh, he effing cared about his writers. He effing cared. Because that show was funny as F. And there's no way that Larry David wasn't on every script. Punching it up, going through it, sending it back to the writers. Funnier. More jokes. Funnier. When I worked on the Simpsons comics, and the guys who were the editors on the Simpsons weren't like comedians, but they knew moments in the comic had to have more jokes. Like there had to be jokes on just about every page. I'm pretty sure. And I would get notes back. Could be funnier. And I would go, oh, geez, better kick up my game. So what a good writer is. A good writer can take that criticism too, and right now we have a bunch of Gen Zers criticism. They can't take like normal functioning day-to-day work, much less criticism. I mean, criticism causes them to fall to pieces or sue you. Actual day-to-day functionings of work don't even work for these people. And it used to be you would hire the young, crazy people to write this stuff. And for the most part, they would suck at it, but there would be a handful of them that had natural talent that you could nurture. There's just no nurturing going on in these, because they don't care. I don't think DC or Marvel cares one whit about who's writing anything, as long as their politics are in order, as long as they're the right skin color, sexuality, or whatever. As long as they can brag to the media about how many black lesbians they've got in a stable or whatever, they're fine. They're fine with it, I think. Personal opinion. So you could write whatever the hell you want. It's not going to matter to them. I don't think they care about the sales in the least. It's just not on their radar. With movies and television, well, at Disney, it seems like they're in the same place Marvel is. It seems to me. Television, again, the money's going out of it, it seems to me. It seems like television's going away at radio. And, there's a handful of people who still do radio plays, but can you imagine getting paid a lot for doing radio play? I can't. Maybe if you're lucky enough to be in a union and they pay a union rate, you get paid okay, but can't imagine that's a super lucrative or steady business as TV once was. I got to think they got to be cutting it all back. They got to be sitting in the studio going, how the hell can we cut our cost? And that's exactly what they should not be doing. A show like Reacher should have been on network television. It would have probably been a major hit. But instead, it's on a streaming platform. I'm going to tell you, it's a pretty good show. But it's based on a book. It's pretty well done. I think the first season's better than the second season, but in terms of the writing, but it's okay. It's pretty good. I mean, it's head and shoulders over most of the stuff I see now. Most of the stuff if I tune into network TV at all, I just go, oh, this is what's on. So most of the problems we could resolve in media with some better writers. And how can we do that? Well, network TV is over. I don't think there's any way you're going to get good writers until the very end. There's almost no money in it, and the rich nepo babies, it becomes even beneath them, and they move on to something else. I don't know what. Then maybe you might get a handful of crazy ragtag guys who are working for some studio that doesn't give an F and just hires a bunch of crazy people. So, I mean, that's what Saturday Night Live, believe it or not. Saturday Night Live was kind of like that. It was a time slot nobody at the network really cared about, and they said, "Yeah, go nuts. What do we care?" If that situation could come up again, then maybe for a brief shining moment, like you did in the '70s, you might get some kind of SNL craziness, or maybe who knows. Movies, it's sort of hit or miss. Each movie is kind of an individual thing, but um, I think the technology will eventually catch up to movies. Again, I think guys like me will be able to make a movie on their computer, and then you'll see something. Oh, then you'll see something then. Um, but finally, for comics is kind of the easiest one to fix. Um, if anybody was willing to listen, but not too many are. I think what you would need to do, I think Ripperverse has almost touched on it, and I hope they learned a serious lesson by hiring Chuck Dixon. A guy like Chuck Dixon can make your comic. Like, I like Eric July. I haven't read Isom, but if I had to bet between Alphacore and Isom, I would bet Alphacore probably has legs. Because Alphacore was written by Chuck Dixon, a veteran of this industry, a veteran of writing many, many stories. And I bet he's got plenty of plans to keep it going. I don't know about Isom. He might have shot his wad on the first one. I didn't read it. I'm not trying to criticize it. I'm just saying it's a difference between two experienced guys. Maybe he's a genius too. But clearly Chuck Dixon, he's already written dozens and dozens of books of quality, I'll say. So, if Eric July follows that route and hires more experienced writers, gets to the point where, that becomes a thing, he could really turn this industry around. But it requires that. And again, it requires some publishing too. Comic books, again, are too expensive. We really need to think about a completely different model. I say a heavy metal type formatted comic with a lot of money behind it would need to run it about 2 or 3 years to build up the readership, and then from there you could launch comics out of it. But it would have to stand on its own, and it would have to have a good deal of money behind it. I think they're getting close to it. I think Iron Age might be able to do that. Maybe. I don't know. Seems to be like it's easier to launch comics because issue number 1 is big. But, when you're into issue 5, 6, 7, people kind of tune out. Yeah, I bought the first 2 or 3, but you're always going to lose people, but you need to keep gaining audience, and that's really the tough part. I mean, I'm doing that with the Pineys. It's tough. Sometimes it's tough. I run into fans all the time, and sometimes they say, "Oh yeah, I bought your first 3 books." I'm like, "Oh, thank you so much. What did you think?" "Well, I haven't read them yet." I'm just like, "Oh God, I can't sell you any more books till you read those." So that's a problem. That's a real problem. But it's not a wide problem, fortunately. I just need more TV time. Speaking of TV time, I'm on RVN Television. I'll mention it one more time. All Things South Jersey, if you haven't seen it. It was a really good interview, so touting it again. But anyhow, I'm going to wrap it up here. Final thoughts on writers. We just need, I'm not just saying this so I can get work. I mean, I'm surviving. But, one of the things I could do, or a guy like me could do, a guy like Chuck Dixon could do it too, or any other decent writers, is they can pick other new writers. They can cultivate them. But we need like a stable of guys, you know, that are working towards a particular goal in media to build something good that's good artistically. They need to be paid. You know, you don't have to pay them gazillions of dollars, but you have to give them monetary incentives for stuff that'll work, you know, especially in comics. They had that back in the day when they were making some money. Now, yeah, I don't know what they're doing. Hopefully, Marvel and DC and places like it will get desperate enough to say, oh, okay, now we need to make money. Let's go back to some sort of financial incentive. We'll pay you some minimum rate and then give you bonuses according to your sales. And then hopefully they'll actually allow writers to write and not, you know, make it some part of this crazy message they keep trying to push. Anyhow, that's my rant. That's just my opinion. All my videos are my opinion, by the way. Those of you who criticize me, it's like, what are you criticizing? I have opinions. I have opinions. If they're wrong, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. So if you're a writer out there and you're frustrated, well, welcome to the party, pal. It's the way the world operates. Until you make a name for yourself, then of course they want you to write everything. That's what happened to Chuck Dixon for a while. Once he had a name, man, they put him on every comic book in the universe for a while. So you know, you got to make your money while you can. But this is the way it rolls, unfortunately. If you're a writer, my suggestion is plan on, if you want to get into film, plan on being a director or producer, just like Shane Black. Same thing in television. Plan on being a producer too. Get in it, start, you know, do the writing, but realize that you're going to have to get into that, at least partially in that role. And in comics, you know, comics is just, it's so dead, man. It's so dead. I don't know what else to tell you. I still love doing it. I still love doing the web comics, but it's rough, man. It's hard to make money now. It's hard. Come to a comic book convention sometime. You'll see. At least you can check out some of the indie stuff that's coming out. Hey, you can check out my stuff. Anyhow, that's it for me. Tony D and Little Joan, somewhere in the house. I'll see you tomorrow at Valare's Lakeside Restaurant in Sicklerville, New Jersey, for the market from 11 to 2. And then later on the live stream, where we do it live. We'll see you tomorrow.